Hey guys, so I'm here on the week 4 computer assignment, and just like before, we want to download our week 4 zip file, and I have downloaded that file and saved it in my homework folder and extracted it, and now I have my week 4 assignment. And just like before, we're going to click on the R project file to open this project in RStudio. And once it opens up in RStudio, I want to click on this week4.rmd, this R markdown file, which is a notebook, an R notebook. And when I click on that, I have this week's homework. So we're going to follow this through a little bit and look at what we're going to talk about. So just like we talked about in previous weeks, I have included the things that we would check before we would do an analysis, and I'm keeping that there so that you can always be aware that we should go through these steps of looking at our data accuracy and scoring instruments, looking for missing data and outliers, and checking statistical assumptions before we do an analysis. And we're getting closer to actually doing some statistical analyses. But I want you to always be aware that you should do those things before you start analyzing data. But we're going to look at a new application starting this week called Jamovi. And I had started preparing the material for this course, and a couple months in, I ran across something, and I didn't think much about it, and I went ahead and I'd seen it a couple times, and I decided to go check it out. And I've kind of changed my direction a little for this semester. Originally, I was planning to just use RStudio the entire semester, but Jamovi is an application built on R, designed to make running statistical analyses a little simpler and a little more intuitive. And it has enough put together that it has everything we would need for this semester. And so I decided to go ahead and change the plan a little bit. I think it's valuable to still know RStudio because it's more than just a statistical application. It's a great development environment for doing R coding. But for doing statistics, like the focus of this course is, Jamovi is, I think, a little more intuitive, and you'll see that that has some advantages. So we're going to go ahead as before and install some packages, and these are the packages that I have. They're Tidyverse, Summary Tools, Rio, and JMV that we've used before. And we'll run this code block. And So as you can see, when you're installing some new packages, sometimes it takes a minute. And let's run it again, and I can see that all these packages seem to be installed correctly. So we're going to go ahead and run this. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and, sorry, I get interrupted. Oh, so I think I had a problem with my knitting before because I had set this eval equals false on importing the data set. And I'm going to go ahead and change that to true. And hopefully when we get through this, we won't have a problem. And what I think I read, if I understood what I read correctly, was that when you knit a file in your R notebook, that it actually starts a new session, and the new session may not see some important objects if you have eval set to false. Sometimes you don't want to run a block of code and have it show up in the final document, but opening this data set is an important step. And what that is going to mean, if I understand this correctly, is that when we knit the document, it's going to ask us to select our data file. And this week we're going to use this week3 .rds, and that's the R kind of native data file. And you'll have to go select that again when you knit the document. So I'm going to change that before I go any further, and I'm going to go ahead and run this. And our select window pops up, and I'm going to select the week3 RDS file. And I think I might have a typo. I don't know if I have a typo in here about selecting a week 4 file, but we're just reusing one from last week. So we can see that we have our data set here. If I click it, I get a little summary. If I click on the word data set, then we'll see the same data set that we had last week. And this was all fabricated data. It's just something there to let us have something to play with. So you'll need to download and install the Jamovi application. And I left the link in here in the homework, and we can go just take a peek at this. And so this has actually even gone a little farther than when I originally installed and ran Jamovi. And when I originally did this, I picked the solid version. But I went ahead and just for kicks downloaded the current version. And I'll point out, I think, what might be a couple little inconsistencies, but it's nothing fatal. So go ahead and try whichever version you want. I haven't found any major problems so far with what I've done in 1.2.2, but feel free to download whichever you want. If we run into an issue, we'll download the other one and try that. So, and I've already downloaded and installed Jamovi, so it's already on my system. So won't go through that process. And you can see I noted here that I downloaded the solid version for Windows, but I've since downloaded the newer version. So then we can open Jamovi. So that's going to be in my Start menu in Windows. I'll have a Jamovi folder, and you can click on it to start the application. So every time I've opened Jamovi, you'll see it basically comes up with some tests along the top. I have a few more. Then you'll probably see there is the left side, which looks like a spreadsheet, and I believe they call it the spreadsheet. You'll see it has 3 sample variables, but there's no data. And there's going to be an output window. When we run things, they'll end up over here. Just to kind of show you what I understand so far, there's this little icon with 3 lines, and we can open data sets in here. We can open Jamovi files. We can save things and export things. And this little arrow will take you back out of that menu. You'll see that we can switch between a data window where we can do things with the data set, and analyses, a data menu, I should say, and analyses, which we can pick. Over here on the right, there's these 3 buttons, vertically stacked, and you can set some options in here. Little arrow will close that window. Yeah. And then there's this big plus that says modules. And if you click on the modules and Jamovi library, then you can see some of the additional modules that you can add to it. And I have added some, which they say installed, just so I could see what they look like. And there's some which are not added, which I don't plan to use right now. So there's an option to add that if you want, and it's pretty simple. You just hit install and it gets added. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. One thing that I did note is that some of these modules that I added, you'll see that here's one called StatCat, and we're going to talk about this one a little bit later. It's helping us to select the proper statistical test, which is kind of a nice tool that I never had in SPSS, so I think it's nice to have a little help when you're learning. And you'll see that there is a corresponding icon there. I've added another one called JSQ, and you'll notice that when I click on this, it has an option to show in main menu, but that never showed up in my main menu. And if I had to guess, then I would say that that maybe is one thing that a couple of these did not show up on the main menu. It's probably a little bug in the new version, and I bet they'll probably work on that, because when I click it and unclick it, it doesn't change anything in the main menu. When I go down here to the StatCat, you'll notice that it adds and takes away. But that's not the end of the world. If you want to get to something in that, you go to modules, go to the one that's an installed module, and you can see I can get to all the things in that module by using this menu right here. So I guess just be aware that's one anomaly I did find in this newest version that I was trying out. Let's see what else I was going to have you do to get to know this a little bit. So we have it opened. So we can open the data set in Jamovi. So we have our folder that we had open, and we wanted to get to this week 3 RDS file. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Jamovi, go to our file menu. I'm just going to call that the file menu. I've heard this called the hamburger in other places to open a menu. I don't know what I think about that name, but I guess people name it what they want. And let's try open. And we're going to go to this PC, and I'm going to go to Browse, and I know that that data set is in on my computer. I have it in kind of a strange place, but we can navigate through my menus and get to my documents. I have that in there, and my video homework file. Now this is in week 4, and there is my week 3 RDS file. So hopefully you don't have yours buried as deep as I have mine buried, but if you do, navigate to it, select the data file, and hit open. And you'll see that here is the data set that we had looked at last week, and it's got the variables in it. And one issue that I had on a previous version is when I opened my data set, it actually kept those 3 sample variables at the beginning, but I see in this one those didn't show up. So that's kind of handy. So there's an open data set in Jamovi. So we can just follow the instructions in the assignment. Okay, so we're going to look at a little more at some of the variables in Jamovi. And if I go to data and I click on the variable name, you'll see that it opened up another little window, a little slider to let us look at this. So sex, we obviously have males and females here, and it's marked as a nominal variable. And you'll see it says integer, and you'll see over here we have the text, the labels, but it also has a 1 and a 2. If I think we save this as a comma separated values file, then these would show up as 1s and 2s. So one of the nice things about this is we can keep the labels with our data, and it's very easy to see which is which. If we there's a couple ways. I can either click on the variable name in the spreadsheet and it will move over to the next one, or we can use these arrows to move from column to column. You'll see this type of researcher is set up, and the labels in my data file, my R data file, looks like they do not come through into Jamovi like they were in my RStudio. If I go back to my RStudio and look at my data set, you see I had some labels in there to tell me what each of these was. So while I did get the data, the levels, and I've got these data types identified, I didn't get the levels, the notes in there. Height, you'll see as continuous variable, and you'll notice you ought to recognize our levels of measurement, nominal, ordinal, and you'll see the interval and ratio are just combined into a continuous category, and that's because all of the statistical procedures that we're doing don't really care if it's interval or ratio. That's kind of a conceptual thing that we need to keep track of, but as far as the statistics goes, interval and ratio data are handled the same way in all the statistical procedures that I'm aware of. Sometimes nominal and ordinal are not, and so a distinction needs to be made. You'll see there's also an ID data type which can be added. And we actually added one last week when we were working on RStudio, and we needed to do some operations on some of the rows individually for some summary and data creation purposes. So I created an ID variable, but Jamovi has one that can be used. You'll notice that the data type is decimal. You got a couple options there. There's a text, so some of the nominal data could be saved as text without having a number, but I would probably stick with using an integer for those things because SPSS would require it that way. So you may as well just get used to keeping the categories numbered and instead of using text. But you can also select a decimal, and there are decimal numbers in here, so that makes sense that they're decimals. Got weight, again, that's continuous. And then we have love stat 1, 2, 3, and 4 that we looked at before. And and I noticed that these are marked as nominal, and it ought to be ordinal. So you'll see they're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we have these labels that go with them. So I'm going to go ahead and just change that to ordinal. Looks like these were not converted to ordinal ordered factors before we brought this over. So I'll go ahead and just change all the ones that I know are ordinal to an ordinal level of measurement. So that's a quick look at working with some data. We're not going to do anything with this, so feel free to play around a little bit. You'll see if I click on a new column that I can make a new variable, and I can either create a new one from scratch or I can compute a variable. Last week we calculated the BMI, and we had the height in centimeters and the weight, and if we wanted to, we could compute a new one, but you can play around a little bit with doing something there. Let's go ahead and say a new data variable, and you'll see it gives it a variable name of L, and I'm just going to give it a more descriptive name of and I don't know what I'm going to have it be. And so if I was going to keep this a nominal variable, you'll see it says integer, which means I can put some numbers in there for different groups. And if I did a different number, then it would show up. And then Jamovi's smart enough to figure out that these are different levels, and if I repeat it, it doesn't matter. Only if I put in a new number would it do something. And if I want to put the name of the levels in here, I can click on the line and put that in. You'll see it keeps the label and puts the little number down there. And I'm going to say retain unused levels in case maybe if I had a 4 in there but none of these had it, I could add a 4 there, and let's go back to this one, and there's our new level. We can call that 4. And if I back that out, you'll see it kept our level there. I guess if I hadn't clicked that retain unused level, that it would probably get rid of the level if I had taken it out. So we're not going to do a ton with this, but just be aware you can work with it. Now, this is one thing that's nice in Jamovi compared to RStudio is RStudio does not let you directly edit your data set, and in Jamovi you have that capability. So this is one area where Jamovi has taken a little step forward from some of the capabilities of RStudio in that we can work with data in a pretty intuitive and familiar way. And it's even a little better than maybe working in Excel in that, yeah, we could put these things in Excel, but we couldn't go through and mark what type of what level of measurement things were. You know, we wouldn't have labels for our categories. So, you know, this is a pretty nice feature. All right, let's see where we're at with on our assignment. So we navigated the variables. So we're going to look at the analysis menu a little bit, and we're going to get descriptive statistics for the categorical variables, and it's pretty intuitive. So of course we want to go to analysis, and you'll see there's exploration and descriptives, and you'll see our variables are listed here, and there's our new one down at the bottom. And we wanted to get descriptives for our two categorical variables. There's a couple ways you can do this. You can either click on it and hit the arrow to move it over. If you accidentally move one over that you don't want, you'll see if you select it, you have the option to move it back. You can also select them and drag them over. So I believe if you hit the control key while you click on these, you can select more than one, and you can drag it straight to the variable window, which is pretty handy. And you'll see that Jamovi puts some output there. And I know that these are categorical variables, so these kind of default to giving us means and you know, minimums and maximums. But with categorical variables, I don't really want that. I really want the frequency. So you'll see I've got an option to select the frequency tables. And if we look at statistics, you'll see it lets us do a little more selecting of what's there. So there's my total number and my number missing. And I'm going to leave those, but I don't really care about the means because this is gender and type of research, or qualitative and quantitative. I don't really care what the mean is because it's not a meaningful number. So I go ahead and just select that, and I don't care about the minimum and maximum right now either. So you'll see when I make selections in here, it changes my output window. I know that I have 100 data points in each of those variables with no missing data. And then I get some frequency tables here with there is the name of the variable and the different levels of the variable, or the different categories, with a frequency and a percent, and I also get a cumulative percent. So that's pretty handy. You may or may not recognize that these are really close to being regular APA tables. So if you are writing something that needs to be in APA format, then these actually are pretty much there, and you can actually copy and paste them into, I think if you right click on it, then we can copy the table and paste it into a Word document if we want to. But I'm not going to work on that right now. Okay. So we want some descriptive statistics. Okay, so we're going to look at some plots on those. So let's go ahead and so you'll see here's another window that says plots down here at the bottom, and we can scroll down and let's go ahead and get a bar plot for those, and you'll see we get a nice bar plot with our two categories for sex and our two categories for researcher type, qualitative quant. So it's not bad. It's pretty simple. And if you it's great to learn the code in R. And sometimes if you're like me, you don't always remember the code right out of the top of your head if you're not doing this every day. If you are, you just kind of know this stuff and you can type it out. But if you're not, you kind of have to look it up every time you do it. And sometimes it's nice just to get something that you want to get quickly. So we're going to go ahead and get some descriptive statistics for the continuous variables. So I'm going to go over here to Jamovi, and I'm kind of done working with my two categorical variables. So I'm going to go ahead and hit that right there, and you'll see I still have my output. And now I'm going to go back into exploration and descriptives, and you'll see that I have my old output, which is left alone, but I have a new output. So when you've got something you want to keep and not change it, then you can hit that and basically close it out and then move on to the next section. So now we're interested in looking at height and weight. I'm going to select them, drag them over to my variables, and these are continuous. And so really what I'm interested in are means and standard deviations. So I'm going to go ahead and get the standard deviation. See if I asked for anything else in there. Standard deviation and range. And so range kind of gives me, what's the range from low to high that I have for variables there. If I had skewed data, I would get the median. And if I get a range, I like to get the minimum and maximum too. It's kind of handy. If I were looking at, we'll talk a little more about, well, I think we talked about skewness and kurtosis. If I'm getting, the mean standard deviations, sometimes it's nice to see the skewness and kurtosis on there. You can tell this is a little negatively skewed, but it's not too much. A little bit, when it's negative on the kurtosis, that means it's platycritic. It's kind of flat. If we got something, and I bet we want a graph next. And let's see. Okay, so this is continuous, so we're going to get a histogram and a box plot. So we'll go ahead and go down to the plots, which is open. We'll get the histogram, and we'll go ahead and put a density curve on it, which sometimes makes it a little easier to see if it's normally distributed. And this isn't, too normal. So you'll see that it's not, it's a little not quite normally distributed. And we'll get a box plot. And it has them grouped. We do have, looks like we got one outlier there on that box plot. So you can play around with these a little bit, but that's pretty easy to see. Okay, so we're going to save this output. We're going to call it week 4 in your name. So we're going to go to Jamovi. I've got all that there, and we'll go to our file menu, save as, and I am going to browse to make sure that I am going to, okay, I'm in my week 4, and I'm going to go ahead and call that week 4, and my name, and save that. And I believe now we have this OMV file. And I'm still trying to figure out what I think about this, but I think there's some logic here. So this is Jamovi's file, and what you get if you can actually give this to someone, and the little bit of reading I was able to do on Jamovi, and they make the point, and I think there's some logic to this, that by sharing this, no, somebody wouldn't open this up directly in something like a Adobe Acrobat and read it, but the Jamovi program is free, and there is nothing stopping another person from downloading and installing Jamovi, and then they can just open this up and see exactly what's there. They will have your data, and they will have your output, and you can share your analyses with anybody else. You can share this output with anybody else, and that's actually pretty handy. I can't tell you how often the SPSS output gets separated from the original data, and it's kind of hard to try and, maybe you found something in the output and you forgot to do something, or somebody didn't do something quite correctly, and you need to get back into the data and rerun something, or check it again, or whatever. And if somebody's not really conscientious and they had saved their output, because in SPSS you save those in separate files. You have a data file and you have an output file. And if they're not conscientious and they don't do a good job of keeping those things in the same place all the time, it can be a little tough. And so I think there's some real logic to having that all in one file, and you just download the Jamovi program and everybody shares that. And it's really easy to share data, and you've always got your data connected with your output. And so I think there's some logic there, and since it's free, there's no reason that somebody couldn't do it. So I think that's not a bad idea. Okay, so we save this. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted you to see was that you can actually get our output, or our code, for what you do in Jamovi. So all of the analyses that are native to Jamovi are in that package that we installed. So the new package that we installed called JMV. That is a package that they created, and it has all of their statistical analyses in the package. If you did not want to run Jamovi, the application, you could still, there's nothing stopping you from installing the package on your RStudio and using that to run statistical analyses. And the nice part is they've got a pretty good basic set of statistical analyses, everything that we will cover this semester in our class, and plus some more advanced stuff. And it's all in one package, and it's all going to use similar ways to do the commands, and you won't be going through 2 or 3 different packages for an analysis. So why not use something if somebody's put it together for you? But even nicer, we have this this output that we created. We can actually go up here to these settings, the 3 little dots, and you'll see there's an option here for syntax mode. And what this is going to do is it's actually going to give us the R commands to run those things. And so you'll see it changed our output. So now we have the R command, and remember this notation that I mentioned briefly earlier this semester, where you have the package, 2 colons, and then the function that you want to use. And the function is just called descriptives, and then it will give each of those things that we included the name, so it basically gives it the tells it which options to include in the analysis. So there were our original descriptives for our categorical variables, and we got frequencies, a bar plot. We're not doing means and medians. We're not doing minimum, maximum. And there's our output changed in a little more text format with our plots. And there's our descriptives for our continuous variables with the different options that we selected. So I believe that we can, so syntax copy. So now I should have that syntax copied into my clipboard here. And let's go back down to where we were. I don't know if I specified okay, so there is some code. I think I copied and pasted some for you. And I believe that the one in Jamovi, well, we'll see. This says week 3. That was my original data. But here I called it data set. So I bet I'm going to get an error right here. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. Okay, so it tells me I have an error. Object week 3 not found. So my data is actually in a variable called data set. So I was kind of expecting that. And we will go change that. And let's run it again. So there's my descriptives. You'll see that looks pretty much just like the Jamovi output right there for that it changed to since we picked the syntax. And here are each of my plots that I had selected. So even if you didn't want to use Jamovi, you've got all the analysis in one place, and all you have to do is learn their conventions for running something, and you'll be able to generate this output, which on its own is pretty handy. Since I already know that week 3 needs to be changed to the name of the variable here in RStudio, I'm going to call that data set, and we'll run that one. And there's my tables, and there are my bar plots. So how easy is that? I'm pretty impressed. I'm actually quite impressed with these guys. This is probably the easiest to use graphical user interface for R that I have for running stats that I have seen. There's a couple others out there, but this one they've really done a nice job of making it pretty simple to use and being pretty thorough with it. This has every analysis that we will run this semester included in the package, and we'll probably talk a little more about some of what we can do. So these are some of the advantages and limitations that I have noted. And okay, this one on a limitation, I have not found a way to make notes or put annotations on the output. So in RStudio, of course, you can write things in here, and you'll have your notes in there, and that is really handy sometimes when you're working with things, to be able to get in there and make comments next to where it is. And I have not found a great way to do that. Although there is, an option here, and we'll probably talk a little more. I installed this module called, let me look it up for you, RJ Editor, and I installed that. And if we look at it, it's this one that has this R here, and it says RJ Editor. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about this later, but this gives us an option to run R code in Jamovi. And there is nothing at all stopping you from putting some R code. We'll go change this to show the code and output, and if I run that, you'll see there's my comment there. So it's a bit of a hack, but and as we noted, if I want to keep that and make another comment, I can just go to my next page and make another comment. And we'll do show code and output and run it. And there's no reason that I couldn't have gone and run a statistical test and then gone into my RJ editor and made some comments about what I was seeing there to keep notes for later. So it's a bit of a hack, bit of a workaround, but I discovered, you can do that. Okay. So this other part, so this limitation that I had run across before, I was not real familiar with how to use the RJ editor, which I did a little more reading on. And this if we go in here and hit this, I think in another video I may have mentioned that you can actually, there's the R that comes with Jamovi that it ships with, but you can actually have Jamovi use the R that's on your system, which means that you can have access to any package that you install on your computer and run the R code and get it out. And Jamovi comes with a number of packages pre-installed. Oh, I didn't want to run that. So I'm going to go ahead and switch that. And we had I'd made another video about session info, and I mentioned that these are some of the packages that you have access to. And there's another command that is also handy. And we'll go ahead and switch that to say show code and output. We're in Jamovi R, and we're going to run and very similar to RStudio, if it is a base function, Jamovi gives you some suggestions on what you might be able to use. And there's a function called install the packages, and so you'll see that when I run this command, now I get a list of all the packages that are installed in Jamovi. And so you'll see there's there's ggplot2. We use that in RStudio. So while Jamovi in itself has some limited graphing capabilities, you have the full package of ggplot2 if you want to make some more complex graphics using the RJ editor. And there's a good number of, I haven't looked up all these packages. This is handy. So this lists the packages. This tells you where on your computer that package is installed. And so some of these got installed in these different folders on my computer. Sometimes that's handy to know. This tells you what version of a package is installed, and so just like everything else, these versions will change over time. Sometimes some packages require a certain version, and you can check and see if you have the right version or not. Some of these packages rely on certain things, so this dplyr package needs R version greater than or equal to 3.2.0. And so sometimes this will let you know some of the things that you need to run a certain package. Not sure what the imports is. I'd have to look that up, but I bet it's either per imports these other ones or these other ones import per, but it's probably something like that. Linking to, there's a lot of information here, and you can go look it up, but some packages build upon other ones or add extra capabilities. And this tells you the type of license. These regulate how you should be able to use and share any package. So I'm not up on all my licenses, but there's different types there. So as you can see, it formats the output pretty nicely. You can get some interesting information. So that's pretty handy. So the RJ editor is, I wasn't familiar with that when I was making this assignment at first, and I learned a little more, so it kind of overcomes a little bit of those things. Again, if you're in a new version, you may find a bug here or there, like I did with the importing data before, or some of my modules not showing up. So just like before, we're going to submit this, and this came up saying preview this time, and I'm going to go ahead and hit that, and there's my viewer, and so I can't seem to get to that one. I'm going to go ahead and say knit to HTML. And sometimes your select file comes up behind another window, and so you have to watch for it, and I knew I needed to. And I'm going to go ahead and select my week 3 data file and hit open. And I got an error. I'm just curious if okay, so it did save my HTML file in my folder, which is good enough for me to turn in. Let's go see if we can let's copy that and go to Google. See if we can get any information on this error. So it looks like that thread is fairly long, and it also says the error is kind of random. So just for the heck of it, I'll run it one more time to see if it. And again, my window opened up behind my other window, so I'm going to go click on it and open it. and this time it ran without the error, so looks like it's kind of random for me too. So as you can see, RStudio and our notebooks, they're great, but sometimes it might be a bit of a challenge. So if you have a big problem knitting, you can screen clip some of your output that you had and the things that you wrote into, paste it in a Word document, turn that in. Hopefully you're able to get your HTML file and you don't need to do that. But there's my week 4 HTML. And there's my output from our JMV. So hopefully that helps you with this week's assignment, and we'll see you guys in office hours.